Food in Tahoe workshop series. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. We're going to mute all the participants' microphones during the presentation because that just makes it easier for everybody to be able to hear the presenter. And if you do have questions or comments about the presentation, please use the chat function at the bottom of the page and type in your questions, and then we will be answering them at the end of the presentation. We'll have a couple people monitoring the chat room, so we'll be able to catch all your questions. I did want to start out by thanking our partners for the workshop series tonight. We have the University of California Master Gardeners of Lake Tahoe. I'm Cindy Wise, and I am a Master Gardener here in Tahoe with the class of 2020, so pretty new to the program. The Master Gardeners they're tasked with taking research-based knowledge from the University of California and passing that on to the horticulture community of Lake Tahoe. Our other very important partners in this workshop series are Slow Food of Lake Tahoe, whose mission is to connect our Lake Tahoe community with self-reliant food culture. So to provide good, clean, and fair food for all. And our last but not least partner is UC Davis, the Tahoe Environmental Research Center, or TERC, and they're dedicated to providing interdisciplinary research and education to advance the knowledge of our beautiful Lake Tahoe here. So thanks again to those three partners, and if you could advance please to the next slide, Heather. I did want to let you know about our upcoming other workshops that are in the series. The next one coming up are beans and peas, as you can see up here on the screen. That will be later in the month. The presentations will be on Wednesdays, and this will be followed by a in-person presentation in the Slow Food Lake Tahoe Gardens up in Truckee. So again, we have beans and peas coming up May 11th and in person on the 14th. Spicy greens on the 18th, in person 21st, potatoes and sunchokes later in May, and then squash oh wait, these dates are a little wacky here. Sorry.
Oh, that's probably my fault. Sorry.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure that squash is after the. We'll get those dates. We'll get those dates corrected and put it up in the chat before the evening's over. And then we have tomatoes coming up in June, and then herbs. And the way that this works is we have workshops on Wednesdays, and then you have an opportunity to purchase either the seeds or the seedlings, and then pick those up the following Saturday. So if you're interested, the workshops are free. There's a nominal fee for the seeds or seedlings. So if you're interested in that, you can go to slowfoodlaketahoe.org/events and sign up for the workshops that you're interested in. So if you could please advance to the next slide, then it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, Heather Adams, who is, as you can see, kind of a Wonder Woman here, soil scientist, master gardener, owns her own business, dog mom, an adventurer, and a sailor. She has been a resident of North Lake Tahoe for over 20 years. She has a bachelor's degree in soil science from the University of New Hampshire. She grew up in New Hampshire on a small rural farm, and she's been gardening ever since she was a little girl. She's also a former board member of the Slow Food Lake Tahoe organization, and she's been very important in making the Truckee Food Bank Garden what it is today. She's worked in all types of gardens all over Tahoe, and she has learned a few tricks that will help us all with the challenge that we have of gardening in the Sierra. Today, she also is a University of California Cooperative Extension Master Gardener, and she's combined all these skills into running her own business that is a specific to Tahoe landscape design and consultation business. So without further ado, please, Heather, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Cindy, for that fabulous introduction, and to all of our partners. I'm so excited. I love teaching this class, and I love sharing my knowledge. I've tweaked it quite a bit. So if you've taken this class before, hopefully I have some new information for you. And we have some great fun times. I've really tweaked a lot of the slides and changed it up quite a bit. And I can't wait to share with you everything. So let's get this party started, shall we? So what is organic gardening? It's kind of a little convoluted these days, as with everything, kind of how to define it. Like, what is it that we're doing with what does organic mean? In pre-industrial times, we didn't really call it anything. There's no need to call it organic gardening. It was just called growing food. Everyone kind of had their own veggie patch with animals. It was kind of like a little mini self-sustaining system. But as industrialization started to come around, so did the chemicalization of our food supply in post-industrial America. And that's kind of like when we started to use a lot of petroleum-based products and a lot of petroleum-based like fertilizers, insecticides, herbicides, that sort of thing. And we started to realize that these were having an effect on our environment because we got a little chemical happy there for a little while. So the organic farming movement arose in the 1940s in America, and it started a little bit earlier in Europe. And it really became popularized in America during the 1970s due to that was like when a big environmental wave really started to hit us in the United States, especially. So that, that's kind of when a lot of these regulations and things started to come into being as far as, what does exactly organic mean? So now, what does this mean for us today? Our organic farms kind of have to go through a pretty lengthy certification process to kind of prove that they don't use these chemicals. And essentially what that does for us is we're able to get a certified thing, that says that this food's organic, it comes from good sources, it's a holistic approach to growing food. And farmers get to charge a lot more for it. As we kind of know, it's expensive to buy organic food. All you have to do is go to the farmer's market and buy 5 things and it's like $100. And you're like, oh my gosh, I need to grow some of this stuff myself. So hopefully we can do that. So, I think as far as we're kind of going for sustainable, holistic food without the use of these synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, it's really kind of at the heart of it. Oops. So what do plants need to survive? So it's really, when we break it down, it's pretty simple. They need sun, they need water, they need air, specifically CO2, and they need a medium to grow in, which most of the time is soil. You can also do stuff hydroponically. I've done quite a bit of hydroponic gardening myself. It's a little bit different, but this is basically what plants need to survive. So we'll start with the sun. In Tahoe, we get a lot of it in the summertime. Sometimes it's a little too much. And one of the things you have to consider when growing food here is, what is your exposure? What direction is my garden facing? What microclimate is in my yard? How much shade do I have? What time of day is it sunny? What time of day is it shady? How many hours of sunlight do I get? All kind of observing your yard and where you're going to grow these things is going to really help you figure out what it is that you can grow there and what's going to do best there. There's this kind of concept in landscaping and gardening, kind of like there's a place and a time for every plant. And essentially, when you think about native species out in the wild, if you go hiking anywhere, you can see these beautiful little natural gardens all over the place. And you're like, oh my gosh, like I want to do that in my house. Okay. It's taken hundreds of years for that plant to figure out how to grow there. Okay. And we are taking these plants and we're taking fruits and veggies and we are telling them, you know what, you're going to grow right here, right now. So they need some help. They need a little bit of assistance to figure out, who's going to work best where. And that where your sun is, how much sun you get, and what your exposure is really going to dictate what you can grow. And in Tahoe, especially, whether you have a sunny garden or a shady garden, one of our biggest challenges is something called the temperature differential. Our days are incredibly hot and our nights are incredibly cold. It's pretty normal during the growing season, which is very, very, very short here in Tahoe, to have a 40-degree swing every single day. So what that means for plants is, essentially plants are like a little mechanism for chemical reactions, right? So the warmer it is, the faster those chemical reactions work and the harder and faster a plant grows. Like that's why plants do so well in greenhouses. They're warm all the time and they're just like, photosynthesis can go off like cray cray. So cold nights, everything kind of slows down. And that process gets really slow. And then it takes more time for the plant to recover and kind of pick up that process. So that temperature differential is something that we're kind of constantly trying to figure out, regulate, and make easier for our plants. So what does this mean for you? If you've got southern exposures, it's warm, it's sunny, it's like really hot. You want to try and kind of grow the hotter plants there, tomatoes, peppers, basil usually does really well in full sun. Sunflowers do great in full sun. When it's a little bit colder, some colder ones, kale, lettuces, spinach. Spinach does not like to be hot. Sunflowers, nuts. I'm just looking at that picture there. Those are kind of a little bit more shade tolerant plants. So you really want to if you've got a shady garden and you're trying to grow those sunflowers there, it's not going to work. So finding the right time and place for these is very important. All right, sun. One things that we're going to really help you. This is actually a picture from the demonstration garden. This is called a cold frame. A cold frame is essentially a raised bed little mini greenhouse. And these are by far from when I worked in the demonstration garden, we got the most product, we get the most crop out of these guys. We could get several crop rotations of leafy greens out of these things this season. And they make these really cool now. Like these ones that we bought, they have a passive system in it. So essentially there's a little wax mechanism in there in the open enclosure unit. And as it gets cold, it kind of goes down and it shrinks and the thing closes. And then when it gets warm, it kind of melts out. And it opens up and it expands. There's no motor, there's no nothing, and it just goes. It's pretty rad. Cold frames are, if you want to grow food in Tahoe, I know there's a woman in Prosser that kind of grows leafy greens all year round in her cold frames. So they're pretty nifty. Okay, our next big thing is water. Water is, super important, and, it's really hard because Tahoe is essentially a high elevation desert. We don't get a lot of water, natural water during the growing season. So providing water for your plants is super important. I can't recommend an irrigation system high enough. Essentially what an irrigation system will do is it'll provide water to your plants when they need it. And it's going to free up a lot of your time, because if you don't have an irrigation system, you just have to spend a lot of time hand watering. Like I'm talking twice a day. People come up at me all the time and be like, I want to plant plants. I don't feel like watering. And I'm like, well, your plants are going to die. So, unless you're committed to watering these plants twice a day, which is like an hour out of your day, every single day, all summer long, your plants are going to die. So you want to have more time to garden. So it's okay to hand water some things, but set up some passive irrigation if you're not going to have an irrigation system. And that little photo down there in the bottom right-hand corner is a great way to set up passive irrigation in your pots. You can also buy self-watering planters these days that kind of come. That's a great passive irrigation. And then somebody is not muted here. There we go. So there we go. So, you know, that's kind of like a little awesome, like little self-made thing. It's just a soda bottle turned upside down. You can kind of create a little water reservoir. And what that does is it allows room for the roots to breathe, and it allows it to suck up the water when it needs it. So it's kind of helps prevent overwatering or underwatering. Another great thing to do is passive irrigation is a thing called an olla. It's like OLLA. It's I believe it's a Mexican or Spanish term. They were developed in Mexico. And they are underwater terracotta like little reservoirs. I believe that they were also used in Greece for olive trees, and they're great. You just bury them in the ground and you keep them full of water, and it will water everything in a 2-foot radius. I really highly recommend looking into ollas. They are so cool that you can buy really fancy ones for super expensive, or you can make your own out of a terracotta pot, just plugging up the hole in the bottom. So I also, some passive stuff in some of my pots I've done. You can take like a milk jug or any kind of container where you can drill holes in the lid, fill it up with water, turn it upside down, boom, passive irrigation. There's all kinds of tips and tricks for keeping your plants watered, but super important. All right, soil, my favorite subject. Here we are in soil. Our plants, you know, this is where the juice is. This is where they get their nutrients. This is where they find all the stuff that they need to grow. This is where they store their water. This is where they get majority of their nutrients from. So it's super important. So what is it? It is organic matter. It's the mineral content, which is sand, silt, and clay. It's microbes, it's fungus, it's animals. All of it together is called the soil food web. And essentially what we're trying to do with our soils all the time is create this diverse environment where there's bugs, there's mushrooms, there's microorganisms. Because when we get all of that stuff together, then it's making nutrients for the plants. Everybody's working together, and you've got your own like little micro environment and like ecosystem going in your garden. It's not the easiest thing to do, but I'm always striving to create a diverse ecosystem within my soil. And if you're planting directly into the ground here in Tahoe, it's going to be really hard to grow fruits and vegetables because our soils are mostly sand. I can't say all of them. I have seen some other stuff, but our soils here are extremely underdeveloped. The last glaciation was about 20,000 years ago. 20,000 years for soil is extremely young. Most of our soils are these things called inceptisols, which are pretty much like the youngest soils around. And there isn't a lot of development happening there, which means there isn't a lot of available nutrients or places for soil to hold on to nutrients that it can then give to plants. It's essentially, we're trying to grow on the beach, and it's hard. So how do we fix that? So a couple of the things that we can do is mulch, and then mulch some more. And I will be preaching this until the day that I die. You want to mulch with good compost in the spring and the fall, pretty much universally, unless you're growing something that doesn't like nutrients, which there are some plants out there that don't really love nutrients, but you know, we're talking the majority here. So we're kind of organic matter and nutrients are constantly getting lost in the soil, and we're constantly trying to bring it back together. So like we're kind of constantly fighting this loss. And mulch does a couple of things. It increases the amount of organic matter, which is going to create more nutrients available for our plants. It's also going to hold in that valuable moisture that we're trying so hard to keep in there. And it's going to create a more diverse ecosystem within our soil. So mulching like just gets it, boom, bada bing, bada boom. Like mulching is great. Let's do more mulching. And like I said, we lack soil development, structure, water holding capacity, and nutrients. As you look at the lake, it's sandy, it's rocks. If you go dig a hole in your backyard, it's probably what you're going to find too. It's what I find in 99% of the yards that I go and check out is essentially really poor soil development. We've got pine needles on top of sand, and if you're lucky, if you're like near a river, if you're near the lake, maybe you'll get a little bit more of that organic matter developed and you'll have a little bit more soil structure. If you're down in Carson, you might have some sediments that are a little bit more clay rich, which presents a whole other kind of bag of worms, so to speak. But mostly we're just really trying to increase this soil development that we don't really have in order to get our plants growing right. I can't say that enough. Mulch. So let's talk about macronutrients. So the macronutrients, and this is like really the heart of our discussion today is talking about. We're talking about nitrogen, we're talking about phosphorus, we're talking about potassium. These are the macronutrients that your plants need in order to go and thrive and be awesome. And I really want you to remember NPK, because that's going to be a theme that we're going to continue to talk about today as we kind of dive a little bit deeper into fertilizer and what it means and what we need to fertilize our plants. So here is a little diagram of the nitrogen cycle. So essentially we're trying to recreate this all the time for our plants. And that's why I say organic matter, mulch. That's why we want these mycorrhizae. That's why we want these beneficial bacteria, because essentially the nitrogen that is naturally in the environment is in the atmosphere. How do we take this nitrogen in this form that's all around us all the time and get it into a nitrate, which is a soluble form of nitrogen that our plants can use? So there's a couple of ways. There's nitrogen fixing bacteria that live in the roots of legumes. And, so we can use legumes. Legumes are some of my favorite plants. They're so cool because they actually have this symbiotic relationship with this bacteria that lives in their root nodules that is able to take nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn it into this soluble form, and plants can use it, and it enriches the whole soil around it with nitrogen. And then when everything breaks down from the plants, they tend to be really rich. So they're a great thing to include in your crop rotation. You constantly want to be like moving around where you put your legumes in your garden so you can naturally create nitrogen in the soil. The other way is through bacteria and fungus, and this assimilation and this breakdown of nutrients to create this nitrogen. It's a pretty cool process. And here's kind of a more simplified version of that nitrogen fixation simplified. And I'm really emphasizing this because, we want to try and use a multi-prong approach to getting these macronutrients to our plants. And nitrogen is super important because nitrogen is essentially what our plants need for upward growth. It's what makes leaves. It is what our plants need at the beginning of life. So nitrogen is super important at the beginning of a plant's life cycle. Some great ways to get nitrogen is through these are just kind of visualizations of the different materials. Compost in either the regular kind of form that you would imagine. You can also get it kind of pelletized in like a kind of a time release kind of way. And I've got some examples that I'm going to do a little show and tell for you. And then bone meal. Sorry, there's a plane. It's too nice to be inside. Oh my God, it's so close to my house. And fish emulsion is another great place to get nitrogen, and also seaweed, kelp, that kind of is another great way to get nitrogen. And of course, peas, legumes are fantastic.
Cindy, your sound went down. Cindy, your sound went down.
It's actually Heather's sound.
What? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you guys hear me?
No, you got really faint, Heather.
Okay. That's weird. Well, it's because of that plane.
No, your sound actually went down.
Okay. Well, can you hear me now?
Barely.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, let me see if I can troubleshoot this really quick. Sorry about this, folks. I don't really, oops, and I'm going backwards here. Hard to find the settings here now that I'm in the full screen. It's not letting me turn it up. How about now? Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right, where were we? Types of legumes. Sorry, that technical difficulty there. Snap peas, sweet peas, bush beans, pole beans, and believe it or not, our friends lupins are also legumes. And so these are the things that kind of grow really well around here. So these are great ways to increase the amount of nitrogen in your soil supernaturally. The next one, P, phosphorus. Phosphorus is super important for the production of fruit and flowers. So that's kind of the acronym nitrogen, green growth, upward growth, phosphorus, food, flowers. And that's really going to help with development of these things. So if you get a lot of leafy growth and you don't get any flowers or nothing's fruiting, it's time to kind of up the amount of phosphorus for your plants. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about this, but phosphorus, food, that's kind of really what I want you to kind of remember what phosphorus's role is. Obviously, a lot of these macronutrients are important for multiple roles all over the uses of the plant, but we're kind of really hyper focusing on, specific things that's easier to understand than all of the processes. Potassium, K, and the molecular form that plants use mostly is K+. So essentially this one positive thing, this one positive molecule, the plant uses it to open and close its stomata. So essentially potassium is essential to a plant's breathing mechanism. The stomata are they're part of the cells in the leaf of the plant, and they open and close to let atmospheric air in, and then they close when they're done. So this is like how the plant breathes, and this is how they kind of take in air. So that's what really is important for potassium, and it really regulates the growth and metabolism. And we can remember that we get a lot of potassium. We need potassium too, and we tend to get it from bananas. Plants do too. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. So this diagram really kind of breaks it down. Nitrogen, green, growth, leaves, phosphorus, fruits, flowers, and potassium, overall health and growth. So that's our NPK. Okay, so these are the really important bits. And then the next bit is the micronutrients. And some of the important ones are chlorine, manganese, nickel, zinc, copper, iron, boron, just to name a few. In this slide, I don't expect you to kind of get a lot of information out of here. I know that there's a lot on here, but essentially what I'm trying to get with this slide is to kind of show you how complicated these processes are in plants. I took 2 semesters of plant biochemistry just about photosynthesis. So it's really, really complicated process. And the plants need a lot of micronutrients in order to kind of create the xylem and all of these mesophyll and mesophyll and all of these crazy plant structures. They need a lot of micronutrients. And the number one thing about micronutrients, and the thing that in the theory that I use in my fertilizer regimen, is they need to get a lot of different types of materials in order to get them to grow. So I like to use a variety of different fertilizers and a variety of different methods and a variety of different stuff. So I increase my chances of these plants getting these micronutrients. All right, so now we get to talk about fertilizer. So you have no idea how hard it is to find a picture of a fertilizer label online. So this is the ones I found. Agrothrive. And I want to kind of, before we talk about fertilizer, I need to do a big disclaimer. I do not endorse any specific brand, and either do any of our sponsors. I personally endorse whatever brand is on sale at the nursery. But with that being said, these brands are difficult to escape because companies do make fertilizer. So, I'm going to show you a bunch of different kinds of fertilizer from several different companies, and I'm going to show you some DIY stuff. But, I don't really hold any of these particular brands, specifically for any particular reason. There are a handful of ones that I tend to gravitate more. It's just because those are the ones that are available in our area. Agrothrive is one of them. They are California based on the Central Coast. And I actually talked to these guys because I wanted to make sure that they were, they were good people. And essentially they actually take a lot of waste from like Costco and kind of big kind of food manufacturing places, and they break it down and ferment it and create this. So not only are they creating this fertilizer, they're reducing waste that doesn't go into a landfill. So I feel like that's pretty good. At least that's what they say. So these two labels are obviously, they are, one says fruit and flower, one says general purpose, but like really what's the difference here? And the important part of any fertilizer label that you look at, so it's going to be really overwhelming. You go into the garden center and there's a whole wall of fertilizer and you're just like, holy cow, which one do I choose? So, this one says general purpose. There's like all kinds of things kind of swing you. Okay, this one's vegetables. This one's fruit and flowers. Okay, so this one says it's potassium enhanced. This one says it's for everything. But like the number one thing to look for are these three numbers, which I don't know if you can see my arrow, but here we go. We got 3, 3, 5, and we got 3, 3, 2. Remember how I said, remember NPK? Okay. Each of these numbers represent NPK, nitrogen 3, phosphorus 3, potassium 2 in this general purpose fertilizer. And then you go over here to this one that's all like fruit and flower, but really it's just got a little bit more potassium. It's the only difference. Other than that, they're totally the same. And how they get these numbers is essentially it's a concentration ratio. And you can actually use these numbers and do lots of complicated math and find out exactly how much you need when for each specific crop, which when you are doing agriculture on a bigger scale, you most certainly do, because you don't want to waste any money or any resources. But as a home gardener, you're not doing that. Nobody does that. Like it's just not something I don't do it. And I know how to do it, and it's paying butt, so I don't do it. And there is some kind of argument that's just like, well, it doesn't matter, like, nitrogen is nitrogen, you still have to add a whole bunch in order to get what the plant needs. Yeah. But we're home gardeners, we're trying to make it simple, and we just want to grow good plants. So the number there, 332 or 335, those are the numbers you want to pay attention to. If it's a non-organic fertilizer, those numbers are going to be huge. If you're looking at something that's like 20, 20, 20, or even some 10, 10, 10 is really high, you're going to want to check to see if it's organic. So what does that mean? So like right there, it says organic on both of them, right? But you can buy fertilizers that say organic, but they're not certified organic. What makes it certified is this little label in the bottom left-hand corner of this thing is called OMRI. That OMRI label is what makes it certified organic. If you're buying something and it has this OMRI label on it, it's organic, it's certified, you can use it. I mean, you can use whatever you want, but like if you really want your stuff to be organic, you really want to look for that OMRI label. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I'm going to go big screen because I'm going to do a little show and tell with you guys about all of, if you guys want to go into view and go to speaker view, hopefully you can make me big. Annie,
I will pin you.
Annie, can you make me big?
Yeah, I'll pin you.
It's not letting me do it.
There.
Am I big? Because all I see is you.
I see you. Anybody
Okay.
else? Cindy?
All right. Well, anyway, I hope that you guys have me in the big view here.
They should.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So I'm going to go through some of my personal collection of stuff, and I'm going to show you what I use and how I do it and when I do it. So we're going to start here with what I kind of showed you on the thing, and that's here is the Agrothrive in person, and this is the general purpose. So I like to have kind of one general purpose, all good liquid fertilizer on hand that I use on the regular for my plants. And then I like to have one like this one. This is a different brand, but this one is a more nitrogen rich fertilizer. As you can see, the numbers on this one, it's 402. So this one doesn't even have any phosphorus in it. It's just a little bit higher nitrogen. And then, so not to confuse you, I fertilize my plants.
Are you kidding me? It's a commercial.
Melissa, that's rude. I'm not like, as I said in my disclaimer, you can use any kind of liquid brand that you would like. But these are just two ones that I use because you have to use something. And I have some DIY stuff that I also use that I will show you later. I would never do that to you in the middle of your presentation, Melissa. So what I do, what I do for this here is I use fertilizer about once a week. And the way that I keep track of that is I think fertilizer Friday, and I garden mostly in containers. So, fertilizing is really important. And it's really the difference of like being able to get fruit from your plants and beautiful flowers, or kind of having them be a little bit blah. So I like to feed my plants on the regular. I also like to feed my plants when they've had a trauma, like if there's been a hailstorm, or if there's been a bug infestation, or there's been some other kind of problem. So, this is when I do it. I do it once a week. And what I do is I use half a regular one, so like, and I follow the directions. All of these have directions. On the back here, it says 2 ounces of fertilizer per gallon. So essentially, and so does this one. So that's about 4 tablespoons. So I use 2 tablespoons of all purpose, and I use 2 tablespoons of nitrogen at the beginning of the growing season. So that way my plants have everything that they need, plus a little extra boost of nitrogen earlier in the program of the growing season. And then once they start to get lots of really big green leaves, then that's when, about halfway through, I want to say, like, in our timing wise, I want to say maybe like July or so, I use something with a little bit more phosphorus. And here's a different brand for you, because like I said, I don't really care about any particular brand here. It's just, you got to use something. And then this one here this one's Dr. Earth. And then this one is 121. So it's got a little bit of extra phosphorus and a little less of that other stuff. So that way your plants have a little bit extra oomph and they're able to have a little bit extra food to create those food and flowers. So that's what I do on my weekly basis or whenever my plants have a trauma. And one of the things that you want to be really careful about when you're, especially when using these liquid fertilizers, is when you do it. So like I do it once a week, but if there's a big rainstorm coming or something like that, then I hold off, because when there's a lot of runoff from these things. So that's one of the things that causes algal blooms in our waterways, and especially along the lake. Like this spring, there's been some huge algal blooms along the lakefront here. And, you know, we can kind of think, oh, what I use in my yard is like no big deal, but like it does have overreaching effects into our environment, and we want to take care of the lake. We want to take care of our roadways. So we want to make sure that we take care of these, and we're using them in a responsible way. One of the ways to use them responsibly, and this is something that I started doing a few years ago after I learned this from another amazing old gardener, is you should never fertilize in as watering. So it should be in addition to watering. So if you're hand watering stuff and you're like, oh, I'm just going to fertilize and water at the same time, that's not really the best way to go about it. Like you want to water in the morning first thing, and then wait a couple of hours, and then kind of go along your fertilizing regime. And the reason being is that the reason for that is you want to have your plants kind of going through their processes and have all of their roots and bits open and like ready to take up the nutrients. If they're super thirsty, they only want the water. They don't even know what to do with those nutrients. So like you want them to be like ready, and all those sites to be ready and available for your plant to just soak them right up. So that's how I use my liquid fertilizer regime, which if you're having trouble getting fruits, flowers, or like your plants are just not doing well, like a regular fertilizing regime is going to do wonders. And so some other things that I do with fertilizing and amendment is every time I plant something, I give it some goodies. So the number one goodie, as always, beautiful and delicious organic compost. And you can make this yourself. It's not super easy up here in Tahoe because there's a lot of critters. They're, getting it up to temperature is hard. They do a great job in the demonstration garden of doing regular compost production. But, I don't do it myself because I don't have enough time. I have like a million jobs and I just buy it or I get it from places. You can, when I bought it in bulk, I've used horse farms up in Sierraville. I've like called them and got like truckloads of it for certain projects that I've worked on. You can also buy it in bulk from different resources. I know like Full Circle is a place that's kind of more South Lake and like Carsonish that has really great compost. You can also get compost from the dump, which is here in North Lake, and they actually take green waste and create compost, and from what I can tell, it looks great. And you can also get topsoil from them, which I've used in bulk when I've done bigger projects, and it's halfway decent. So whenever I plant, I give it a handful of compost, boom. And you can also use, in addition to liquid fertilizers, you can use like an all-purpose fertilizer like this one. This one's 444, just a little handful as you're planting in the bottom, kind of give it some slow release stuff. And this comes in all different kinds as well. Like this is an all-purpose one. This is another all-purpose one, but it's enriched with mycorrhizae and different stuff. And it's a little bit higher, 555. And like I said, I'm always trying to introduce the microbes and the biomes and things like that to the soil in as many different ways and in many different varieties of things that I can. That's why I like to use a variety of different fertilizers from a variety of different brands in a variety of different ways, so I can increase that amount of micronutrients that will be available to my plants. you really want to nerd out, you can go to the hydroponic store and they have like so many cool things. I've got this, it's a mycorrhizal inoculant that you can get. And this is like a little powder, and you can put like a little bit of that in there, and it helps increase the mycorrhizal available in your soil. And that's kind of like that's like a little extra treat. The stuff's expensive. So when you're at home, there's some stuff that I do on a very limited basis. It's a little bit more DIY. And one of the things that I use are our friends for a little extra potassium. We all have these, right? These old bananas. You know, peel it, go use the banana in your smoothie, but then take the peels and chop them up. And I create this thing that I call banana tea. I put the peels in a jar like this, pour hot water over it, and then I let it sit and steep for quite a long time, and you'll get this great potassium rich. And I would not recommend doing this like on the regular. Like I do it like once a year to some of my favorite plants, some of my favorite bushes, some of my favorite trees, because it does attract pests, because there's no breaking down or fermentation that happens in the soil. So like you don't want to attract too many pests or like flies or like gross things. So when I add this to my favorite tree, her name's Penelope, she's a perfect purple crab apple. I give her one of these once a year, and I dig a little hole next to her roots, and I pour that solution of the broken up bananas in there and with all that liquid, and she's got a nice little dose of potassium. Another thing that's really great is this guy right here. We all have this left over. You know, this is from my coffee this morning. You want to use that when you just on certain plants at certain times, like hibiscus really like coffee grounds because they like it a little bit more acidic. I used to work at a blueberry farm when I was a teenager. We put coffee grounds on all the blueberries. It's a great thing to kind of put on if you're trying to, you know, create the acidity. And there's certain specific plants that really love coffee grounds. I usually do the same thing. I kind of put it in with some water, shake it up, so it's easier to distribute. And so you just don't have like a big pile of coffee grounds on something. So those are kind of more of like the solid things that I use. All right, so let's go back to, let me see if I can go back to the presentation here. All right, here we are, fertilizer. And if you have any questions, I know that was a lot of information. I'd be more than happy to ask more, answer more questions, and whatever you need. You don't have to take my word for it. Here are some of my plants that I grow. I mean, I grew some dahlias the size of my head last year, and some beautiful roses. This was my take on the three sisters. I did sunflowers and pole beans and bush beans and little baby squashes, and they all came out great in a wine barrel. I have a small dahlia obsession, so you really need to pay attention and baby those things like crazy. And I have to tell you, I mean, I think these photos are all from me from my garden last year. So I do have a little bit of success and knowledge about it. So let's talk about troubleshooting. This is probably one of the biggest things that's a little difficult here in the organic gardening realm. Aphids are something that I have never been able to go gardening season without. My first line of defense with any kind of problem that I come into the garden is the garden hose. Let me blast them off with those things. And you know, as soon as they appear, like I try to, you know, that's one good thing about, you know, kind of paying attention to your plants and spending time in the garden is, you know, when these problems arise, you can kind of nip them in the bud before they become a huge problem. Like most of my problems that have really gotten in the gardens after I go away for a few days, I come home and I'm like, no, my gosh, this whole thing is covered in aphids. What do I do? So Blast them with the garden hose. I usually do that first. I make a concentrated garlic spicy pepper solution. And essentially what that is, I take all that garlic that's dying in my kitchen and I chop up the spiciest pepper I can find at the grocery store or the farmer's market. I boil it back on the back of the stove for a while. And then I strain it and I make a concentrated spray out of it. And I spray the crap out of my plants with that. They don't like the taste of it. But you got to be really diligent. And you want to make sure you wash your plants before you eat them. You can also use neem oil, but neem oil can really affect your other good bugs too. So you want to kind of, I've moved away from neem oil because I don't want to, it says that it's safe and all that stuff, but I want to encourage all the good bugs too. So I use it as a final kind of last resort. I've also released ladybugs before, and lacewings is another type of predatory bug. If you do go and use ladybugs and you buy that thing that's at the garden center, the number one thing is you want to keep them in the fridge, and then you want to release them at sunset, and they're more likely to stay on your plants, but they will most likely all fly away. But hopefully they can be there for a couple of days before they get some more damage. Critters, this is probably what I get asked about the most because they definitely cause quite a bit of havoc. Caged lids is the best preventative measure. Sound activation devices. I like to encourage my dog to spend as much time with me in the garden as possible. Cats, traps. If you do trap something, it's not legal to release them somewhere else. Actually, the most legal thing you can do is kill it on premises, which is kind of gruesome. I don't like that, so I don't trap. But the best way is to just protect your crops and keep them away. The blue jays, a lot of times I'll use like a little wind wheel or some sort of like wind mechanism because they don't like the movement, and that can kind of often keep the blue jays away from stuff. I've also used cayenne pepper along the edge of my pots as the squirrels and stuff could kind of jump in there. It gets in their eyes. They don't like it. Multi-prong approach for any of these things is really what's going to hurt them the most, help you the most. These are the cage lids that are in the Truckee demonstration garden or the Truckee food bank garden, or the community garden there. And these work really, really well because they keep the critters out. You can get in there and, these are really what works best in Tahoe because the critter situation is pretty intense. Weeds, the bane of any gardener. The best thing to do is to pull them up by hand. And the best thing to do is get them early in the season before they go to seed and go to town while they're still small. Weeds steal valuable resources from your crops and prevent growth. You want to get rid of them as soon as you see them. You can also use a concentrated white wine, or I don't know why I always say white wine, white vinegar solution. It's called acetic acid. You can get it in horticultural grade. The regular one you can get off the shelf you can use, but it's not quite as effective as that horticultural grade one that you can get. It's great to use in large areas. If you've got like a mulched area where you don't want anything to grow, it's a great way to kind of organically get rid of weeds or use as an herbicide. The big drawback is that it will kill all your plants. So if you're using it right next to a plant that you want to survive, it'll kill both of them. So you want to be really careful about where you use that. Trial and error is probably the biggest thing. And this is kind of part of the fun of gardening. I've always got some kind of gardening project. I'm always trying to grow something that's a little bit better than the or better or stronger or different, or that's really fun. What grows well in your garden is often learned through this process. Sometimes it differs from year to year, and even the most talented, amazing gardeners kill things, and I kill plants all the time and I just replace them. I try not to, but it's part of the process. Sometimes there's a big frost in July. Try not to feel too bad about it and get back out there, replant your seeds, replant your plants. It's all part of it. I'd like to invite you to follow me on the Facebook or the Instagram on both, my personal and my professional ones. I probably post a little bit more on my personal one. I do all kinds of fun gardening content. I also do quite a bit of sailing and lake content and fun backpacking and skiing and ice skating and fun winter sports too. So please feel free to follow me on social media if you want to kind of have some more information there. And you can also feel free to contact me with any additional questions that we don't get to during this presentation. My email is gaiasoulhome@gmail.com. Happy gardening. And here's some of my, one of the funnest parts is harvesting. So here's me reaping the benefits of some of my harvesting. And I hope that you get some great harvests from your garden as well. So now we're gonna do a little Q&A. This is Penelope. I remember telling you about my beautiful tree. There she is. And some of my dahlias and my beautiful dog. So here we are. Oops, go back. There we are. Let's do some questions. So this is Mary. Are you able to get some questions going for me?
Yes. Sorry, Annie, I had to reclaim host because I couldn't unmute myself. And folks, I did send out a request to everyone to have questions sent to me. If you have any more questions, please let me know and I will add them to our question list. Let me get to my list, Heather, just a minute here. Oh, it's not moving. Okay, here it goes. Okay. All right. One question, what might we use for the wicking material on passive irrigation sample? I'm not quite sure what that means, but you might.
Well, terracotta is a really great thing. And that's kind of like that's what most oleas are made out of, are terracotta. Because you want that to be able to like seep through, untreated terracotta is porous. So
Yeah.
the water can kind of go through it. So that's a great thing. Some of the other, you can use like felt fabric as like a wicking material, or, some sort of like rock wool also works well as a wicking material. Burlap fabrics, natural fabrics work really well as a wicking material. I believe.
So how do you add the burlap as a wicking material?
So like if you made that like that, if you remember that reservoir picture,
Mhm.
if you put that on the bottom, there's several different ways you can do passive irrigation, and I highly recommend kind of going down a YouTube hole or, and really going in depth about it, as, I've only done a handful of different things, but you essentially, you kind of put it at the bottom of your plant and you have like kind of just a bottom kind of coming out in the reservoir underneath. So you kind of have that fabric in the and the plant is able to kind of draw it up through its roots from the bottom without actually saturating the roots. You don't ever want to saturate your roots with water because essentially it suffocates them. They need that airspace in between to be able to work and do their processes and get the nutrients that they need. Like if they don't have air between the roots and the soil particles or whatever medium you're using, the plants aren't going to be able to they're going to drown essentially, unless they are water-based plants that grow in a bog.
Heather, are these in pots or do you do this in the ground?
In pots, I would say mostly.
Okay. Those are just my questions. Okay, the next question was, how is it spelled? Ola,
O-L-L-A, like oh yeah.
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh yeah, like OLLA, like like the double L in Spanish is like olla. You know, there's several really great YouTube videos on ollas, and like there's this woman that I follow, and her YouTube channel is called The Lovely Greens. That's where I learned how to do mine. And she has lots of really cool DIY stuff, and she gardens on the Isle of Man, and it's beautiful, and she has a lovely accent. So I would recommend, that's like one of my go-to people that I like to follow. So I'd suggest starting there. You can also look it up online. There's all kinds of different ones, all kinds of different sizes. It's one of the oldest ways to irrigate, is using an olla.
And that can be used in the ground as well.
Yeah,
correct?
you can bury those in the ground or
That's
in a
what
pot. And then essentially this reservoir. And it's crazy because the plants will actually like grow their roots like around them, so they can just suck up the water. They're so cool.
Okay, the next question. Is there a way to compost in Tahoe with the bears? Ha.
There-
Hello.
Yes, the answer is yes. You know, but you want to have it secure, you know. Worm bins are a great way to compost in Tahoe, especially if you have like a garage space. That's a great way to kind of create your own compost. I know that Slow Food did a worm bin workshop a couple years ago, but they're relatively easy kits to order online. There's also this thing, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this. I think it's called Bokashi, which is like I believe it comes from Korea, and that's essentially like a fermentation like bucket that you can create compost in, and you can get some of those kits from all kinds of different gardening places, or you can create your own, and that's kind of like a multi-tiered bucket system where you create like an inoculant, and then you create this hyper composting environment in a 5-gallon bucket system, and that it drains, and you can use that drainage liquid as a liquid fertilizer for your garden. It's a whole class unto itself, is kind of creating and using that as your fertilizer. But you can definitely do that here. If you're going to go for straight compost bins and kind of creating what they do in the demonstration garden, I highly recommend going to Truckee and checking out what they do in the garden there, because they are definitely probably the most successful composting that I've seen around. You want to have a fenced in area. You want to have it, you know, you got to have it turned. You got to have it. It's not easy. It's kind of complicated. And you got to have your ratios right. You got to have your nitrogen to carbon ratios right. And you want to make sure you have enough stuff there. So I would, you know, it's a complicated subject with lots of different nuances, but I would, if you're trying to just do it in your backyard for home scraps, I would look into Bokashi and some worm bins. There's a thing that I want to get. It's a counter composter, but it's expensive, and it's one that you can do in your house. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it keeps showing up on my feed, and I am so tempted to get it because it seems too good to be true.
One question, the demonstration garden that you noted several times is the Truckee Garden.
Yeah, the food bank garden. It's had several names over the years. I tend to refer to it as demonstration garden because that's what we called it when I helped create it and work in it. You know, but I believe it's the slow food gardens. It's the food bank garden and the community garden. It's a big garden area in the Truckee Regional Park, nestled between the baseball fields and the amphitheater. It's really cool there. I highly recommend going there. And that is where I'll be teaching the class in person on Saturday.
Great. Yes. Okay, we have a few more questions. Would love some questions how to deal with slugs.
Yeah, slugs they're a pain because they come out at night and they tend to kind of wreak havoc. You know, physical removal of them. So going out at night with a flashlight and just picking them off is one line of defense. Another line of defense is Diatomaceous Earth. is this stuff that you can get. It's essentially like really, it's like little microscopic looking like razor blades to them. And essentially you can kind of create little rings around your plants. And when the slugs go across it, they get all cut up and they don't like it. So that's one way. I've never had to battle slugs. I'm going to knock on wood on that one. You know, beer supposedly helps. You can kind of do a reservoir of beer. They really love beer. So you can like put a low saucer or bowl full of beer near your plants, and they will go into the beer and drown themselves rather than get all over your plants. So that's another line of defense against slugs. As with anything, a multi-prong approach is best. I've also seen people use tinfoil kind of at the base of their plants, and it creates a slippery surface so the slugs can't get up the stems. It helps kind of keep them off the leaves if the leaves aren't near the ground. Those are kind of the ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
Great. Thank you. I know we've gone, it's after 7 o'clock, but I would like to continue with the questions if you have.
I can do some more.
Okay, great. Okay, let's see. Will the recordings of the online presentations be available if you can't join on a Wednesday? And I can answer that question for you. Yes, they will be. I'm not sure of the timing of that because we have to edit the recording, and we'll get it up as soon as possible. One question that I had is, do you dig up your dahlias over the winter? You say you have lovely dahlias.
I do. And, you know, and yes, I most certainly do.
Okay.
I've gotten them to grow back several times because I had a good place to store them in a garage at my old house. My new house, I don't have that. And I tried a different method, and I don't think my bulbs survived this year. So I'm a little bummed about that. But also, one thing that I forgot to mention is white mold. I battle white mold in my garden every year, and it's a pain. And last year I did a big experiment because I was just like, all my dahlias got white mold, and I was just like devastated. So I did a big deep dive on different ways to get rid of white mold, and I did a bunch of different types of spraying. I did milk, I heard, because the acidic of milk, and I did one milk one. I did one of soap, and I did one of this stuff, which I meant to kind of show during the show and tell. And it's a ferment. It's called EM5, and you can make your own EM5 if you've got mad fermentation skills and several like oil drums and an infinite amount of time to play with fermenting. I don't know about you. I don't have that kind of time. I buy my EM5, and it's a ferment of all kinds of different stuff. So this is, as you can kind of see, it's well used. And this is made by a brand called Build a Soil. Sorry for the plug, but it's the only people that I've found that make it. And it's an organic like pesticide and kind of deterrent for a lot of things. And it's also, you can use it to clean your garden tools. You can use it for all kinds of stuff in different concentrations. And it's essentially just apple juice, grape, yucca, peppermint, garlic, horseradish, pepper, and like all these crazy things fermented. So it doesn't harm the plants at all, but the bugs, the mold, everybody hates it. So I used almost all of this. You can see there's only a little bit left in it from last year. And I want to say this was like 15, 20 bucks. So I was stoked, and I used this, and it works the best out of all the things that I found that I have white mold in my garden.
Okay, let me see. These are just some comments. So good, thank you. What do you recommend filling my raised beds with? Where do you get the soil in large amounts that is also cost effective?
Well, you know, you if you have like really deep raised beds, you can kind of use some yard waste at the bottom, you know, like sticks, pine needles, pine cones, kind of fill up some of that extra space in the bottom. I don't recommend.
Microculture.
Yep, exactly. You can even use like cardboard and newspaper, all kinds of different stuff like that to kind of fill up that bulk space in the bottom. And you can buy all kinds of, there's all kinds of different distributors all over. You can get soil from the dump here in North Lake, up at Cabin Creek, and it's relatively cheap. I have gotten stuff from them in bulk, and the disclaimer there is they can deliver, but there's no repercussions for what they deliver, when they deliver, how much is delivered. So like you can kind of pay for it and you kind of take whatever they give you. I've been disappointed with them a couple of times. I've also been really happy a couple of times. If you want to get it from a more reputable place, I know Rock and Rose does it in bulk in Truckee. I'm not as familiar with South Lake or Carson, those places where you can get stuff in bulk. But a lot
Topsoil at most any rock and gravel place.
by the yard. I would say if you're finding it for like, I don't know, I think it's, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head because I haven't had to buy it in a while. But you can get like a pretty big truckload of it from some of those places for like $80 to $100, which is definitely cheaper than buying it by the bag. And I hate sometimes how much waste comes with buying everything in those bags. So I definitely recommend kind of getting it in one of those places if you can. And sometimes, getting it by the cubic foot, you get a lot more than you think, when you're paying for it by the yard rather than the bag.
Okay, just a minute. When is it time to give up on a plant and start over?
Oh, that's a big personal decision, I think. I've had a poinsettia that I bought for $5 from the grocery store for like 6 years that I've barely kept alive, but like I threw away an ivy that had mealy bugs for, because I didn't want to deal with it. If the roots, I would say some of the stuff that I use to kind of, if the roots seem like they're really unhealthy and everything I've tried, I can't get their roots to grow, or if it's just kind of, really sad looking and I've been babying it and kind of encouraging it and it's still kind of sad looking, I will sometimes give up on it and then go and buy something from the nursery and plant it there that's a little bit better. I would also I think that that's an intensely personal decision.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying to read these. You mentioned, where do we find out more about OLLAS, OLLAS? You just Google it.
Yeah, I would just Google it. I spent a bunch of time researching them. There's like an Oya manufacturer out of New Mexico that you can buy them from direct that I found, but buying them like a proper Oya from an Oya manufacturer, they're expensive. Like a little one's like $30. So, if you are really into the aesthetics of things and you don't mind spending the money, they're really cool, but they are pricey. If you're trying to save money and you want to do it in an easier way, you can just buy a terracotta pot from the nursery and plug up the hole and then use the saucer as a lid and bury it in your garden.
Okay.
You just got to make sure that hole that's comes in every terracotta pot is tight so it can hold as a reservoir.
Okay, so what's the name of the thing you put in the soil to water the plants? That's the yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Overwatering, tips to avoid root rot.
So it depends on the soil medium. If you are watering directly into the soil here in Tahoe, I would say less more often is really the way to kind of go. I find that, if you're moving from somewhere else, specifically the Bay Area, you can water once or twice a week for like an hour and your plants are okay. You can't do that in Tahoe. You need to do once a day or twice a day for like 10 or 15 minutes because our soils here don't have any water holding capacity. So you got to be real careful with that. If it's in a pot, if there's no drainage, you got to be really careful about it because essentially you're you might get that root rot because there's nowhere for the water to go when when you water it. So you just got to water a little bit all the time. So if that's the case and you have a lot of plants in your house that are like that, or you have a lot of pots like out in your yard that are like that, I would get a water meter. I don't have one out here. They're cheap. You can get them at the garden center and it'll tell you whether or not you need water. If you have a hard time trying to figure that out, I would suggest getting yourself a water meter and checking it out. I use my finger, if it's wet, then I don't water it. Depending on the plant too, some of them really need to drink a lot and some of them not so much. So here in Tahoe in the middle of the summer, the plants need a lot of water. They go through it.
Yes. Question, where is there a hydroponic store? They're all over. Yeah.
There's several in Truckee.
There's several in South Lake. So
there's one on West River Street. The one that I really like is over I believe it's in the Pioneer Center over by like the Lone Wolf Brewing Company and Full Belly Deli, just beyond there in that. It's right next to the water fixture store. There was a Nevada Supply Company or whatever. That's a cool hydroponic store and there's all kinds of fun goodies in there.
Okay, where can we get a transcript of this Zoom? I'm thinking we can, again, we'll have to post that on all of our websites if we do have the transcript. What's best to use on lilacs? I mean, I don't know, my lilacs get nothing almost, so I don't know.
I have a lilac and I don't do a whole lot to her. I mulch her in the spring and the fall and I water periodically through the summer. And I trim her back, after blooming. It definitely trim her down, give her a nice little haircut prior to winter. If you're worried about her branches breaking, you can tie her up. There's different camps of whether or not you tie up bushes. I find that if I tie up my bushes and make sure I release them earlier, then I have less breakage.
Yeah.
But the thing about lilacs is they like to produce blossoms after their blossoms have been like next year, they'll produce twice as many blossoms after you trim where the blossoms have gone the year before. So you want to cut your lilac blossoms. Like growing up, my grandmother had a hedge of lilacs and it was heaven. It was so beautiful. And we would, as a young kid, we would make these massive lilac bouquets and give them to all the neighbors because we wanted to trim those blossoms and we wanted to get as much enjoyment out of them as possible. So you really want to make sure that you trim up those blossoms. If you leave the heads on them throughout the summer and into the next growing season, they won't create a bloom there again. So trim them up.
Yes, I had no idea. I will do that this year.
You'll
Okay.
have twice as many blooms next year.
Yeah, I had no idea that I should do that. Can we get animal manure and what kinds are okay? Llama, sheep, chicken?
You can use any kind of animal manure, really, the number one thing to remember when you are using animal manure is you want it to be composted. If you just get a pile of horse shit from the farm and you put it directly on your plants, it's going to burn your plants, because essentially that nitrogen hasn't had a chance to reduce and turn into a plant available form, in that it's so nitrogen rich, it's just going to burn your plants. So you either like want to get that fresh manure in the ground after everything's died back and turn it in and get it like really in there, and then it'll be good next year. Or you want to try and make sure that it's been sitting for a bit and it's composting, and then you can use it. It's good to go. I grew up on a small farm, so that was like one of the main things that we used for fertilization, because it's all kind of like part of the system. And you just want to make sure that it's been composted down and kind of has had some time to lose some of that soluble nitrogen that's like really intense when it first comes out of the animal. Oh, I forgot to talk about compost tea. That was one of the things I wanted to talk about, and I totally forgot. So if you take that wonderful compost, or especially, and this is something we did growing up on the farm, and it was like one of the main things we used as fertilizer, is you take a 5-gallon bucket and you take that composted manure, throw it in the bottom of a bucket, fill it up with water, let it sit in the yard in the sun for a couple of days, boom, you've got liquid fertilizer. That's a great way to kind of create that liquid fertilizer regime without having to buy all the specifics. But you're not getting it from a variety of places, but it's something that we used quite a bit on our like little farm growing up.
Okay, yeah, there was another comment on compost tea that can be sprayed on pests. That's true. Pour beer in tuna cans and the slugs crawl in and die. What about straw bale gardening up here? Would that work? I've seen that here.
It does, but it's really, really, we didn't have, we tried it in the demonstration or in the food bank garden when we had beans and peas and straw bales for a number of years. And they did okay. They're because they can't draw that many nutrients from the straw, you have to be really active in the feeding of the beans and peas. So that's kind of the drawback, is like if you got to be really on top of that fertilizer regime and feeding those plants as often as possible. Because we had a lot of weak looking beans and peas out of the straw bales for several years, and then we just decided to not do it anymore.
Something about the compost, thinking of loamy. I'm not sure what that means. Okay.
I mean, if you're thinking about loam, like loam is both a soil texture and a material. Loam tends to be in the center of the soil's triangle, so it's like even amounts of sand, silt, and clay. And so like, that's kind of the ideal soil texture, is that loamy bits. I don't know if that's what that question's referring to.
Okay. Question, have you ever heard of using Bronner's peppermint soap for aphid control?
Oh yeah, for sure.
It burned my leaves.
Well, probably if the thing is, whenever you use any sort of soap, especially a lot of, I use a fair amount of essential oils like clove oil, peppermint oil, that sort of thing. You got to dilute it. If it's not diluted, it's not gonna, it's gonna burn your plants. Like one of the rules about fertilizing and like using any of these, really any kind of additive or amendment on your plants, is they need a little bit often. So if you're like, oh, I bought all this fertilizer, I'm going to throw it on all my plants. If you just put the concentrated amount of stuff on your plants, they're not going to do anything. They need it to be diluted, and they need it to be delivered in a regular fashion on a regular basis. And that's true for whenever you're treating any sort of aphids or whatever, when I was treating my white mold on my dahlias last year, I was doing it like almost every other day, spraying my plants everywhere just to keep it at bay so my plants could survive through the fall. And that was kind of, it was very laborious. But you can't just be like one and done with like anything, especially when you're trying to get rid of pests or troubleshoot anything. It's usually a multi-pronged approach that you have to be really consistent in order to have any kind of effect.
Oh, how do we deal with water restrictions?
Well, this is, there's all kinds of stuff you can do. You can save your water, your wastewater, from when you do stuff and water your plants with that, a lot of the
Collect it when you
shower,
can.
bath, as long as you're using all natural stuff. Like, I don't want to say like I don't really know what the gray water restrictions are around here, but I've taken a bath and then use that to water my plants during water restrictions, and my plants have been really happy about it, actually. But I've also, most of the times it has to do with time and frequency of watering. I know in South Lake, I think that you guys were like completely banned from watering for a little while, right?
I don't think so. I think we had our days.
You just gotta like be on top of your days and your times, watering early in the morning and later in the evening. Raven, it's
Compost,
okay.
Putting compost on top of
mulching,
mulching,
like I
yeah.
said, mulch. There's a million different things you can use for mulch, and that's really going to help keep your water retention in your soil, and it's going to help reduce evaporation from the plants, and really help everybody all around.
Okay, can we get organic products at big box stores? I've seen them.
There. Like I said, you want to look for that OMRI label, number one, because a lot of times those big box stores, they try and trick you, and they'll say stuff like, oh, this is like, it'll say organic all over it, but there's no OMRI label on it. So it's not actually organic. Like,
Okay.
there's no regulation for using the word organic on labels. So like, stuff can say it's organic, but if there's no OMRI label, it's not actually organic, and you don't know if the sourcing of that material is good or not.
Mm-hmm.
I avoid kind of bigger brands like, Miracle-Gro, because I don't trust them. My ex-mother-in-law used to like hide all the Miracle-Gro from me when I came over, because I would like be like, what are you doing? She's like, it's organic. And I'm like, no, it's not. It doesn't even say it on here. Like, who told you that? So like, you want to like be aware of these labelings and these things. If it says organic and the numbers are 20, it's probably not. So be a conscious consumer. The problem with a lot of these chemical fertilizers is they're in such high concentrations that it just leaches away, and it goes straight to the lake, and it causes these algal blooms. And it's, the plants can't even use it. So it's like, you're just like wasting this chemical that just kind of goes into our environment and really affects the natural processes of things. So you really want to like be super aware of like what you're buying, when you're buying it, when you're using it, to kind of help reduce those impacts on the places that we love. Nobody likes to see those massive algal blooms in the lake. It's gross, and we can all do our part to try and reduce that.
Well,
Okay, one last question. Outside of having some sort of greenhouse, what tips for handling extreme temperature swings, especially overnight? I mean, covering them with frost.
I have frost cloth on
Yeah.
the ready. I diligently watch the temperatures. I don't plant out my sensitive plants until June. and, you know, I try and use a lot of kind of more hardy plants, you know, that are, you know, I love to plant onions and chives and violas and parsley and kale and things like that. My kale overwintered. It survived in the snow. Like, you know,
Oh
using,
yeah, it will do it second year all the time.
yeah. So like, you know, kind of having these hardier plants helps, you know, and the other thing you can use, sometimes I'll do is like, I'll get like big water jugs, you know, things like that, and fill them full of hot water and put those next to my plants. I also have big chunks of obsidian that I have near some of my favorite plants, and those will warm up during the day and help keep my plants warm at night. And, you know, frost cloth really helps during those like really cold snaps that inevitably happen in July after your plants have been like happy for like 6 weeks out.
Yeah, even old sheets work.
Yeah, I've gone to the thrift store. You know, I remember one time like a frost came, and I went to the thrift store and bought a ton of sheets and just covered everything. You know, I used ski poles to hold them up, and I tied it all down, and I protected my plants with like old sheets from the thrift store.
Great.
Well, it's now 7:30.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Heather, and to Annie and Mary for helping out with the questions. And thanks everyone for participating. Heather's contact info is up there. And I was just gonna throw out a reminder that the next workshop coming up with peas and beans will be May 11th in person in the garden on May 14th. So
And that squash date is supposed to be 6, and it's supposed to be June 1st and June 4th. Sorry, I messed that up.
right. So there you go. Squash will be start of June. The 11th will be beans and peas. Those will be a seed. And again, thank you everyone for spending your evening with us, and have a great night.
All right. Thank you so everybody so much for coming and listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a good time. I always love teaching this class.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Bye everybody.
Good night.